Okay, what I wanted to do is talk about Daniel chapter 2 today and just give you a few little insights on a few things. And what I had noticed a long time ago is how Daniel would have known things. Now, the Holy Spirit can come upon a prophet and he can instantly know a few things. But other times you're studying the prophets and you know things. And I just wanted to share a few things like that with you. So in Daniel chapter 2, and we'll look at the vision here in a minute, but in Daniel chapter 2, we have Daniel is a prophet. He's in Babylon. He knows the prophecies of Jeremiah. He says in Daniel chapter 9 that I knew about the prophecies, and this is the end of the 70 weeks. And so this is what happens. And these kind of things. So I wanted to first start off and look at a few things. So this is from my book, Ancient Prophecies Revealed, but the prophecies revealing with Cyrus in 537. Now, this is specifically prophecies out of Isaiah 44, 45, and on. Now, Isaiah is writing in the mid 700s, so the 8th century BC. Daniel, this is 537 basically when this happens. So even in the fives, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Isaiah the prophet has written his prophecies, created a book, and they have had in their canon, or at least access to the prophet Isaiah for 300 years. So Daniel would definitely know about these prophecies. So here's a few of them. In Isaiah 44, verses 27 to 28, it says, "It is I who laid the depths of the sea, be dried up, and I will make your rivers dry. It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of my temple, your foundation will be laid." And this is a prophecy, and I go on in here and talk about a few of these things about Cyrus is king of the Persians. He comes to besiege Babylon. And he does so, but Babylon is an incredibly large city with crops and stuff in the city. It's sitting actually on a river. So they have all the water they need, all the sunshine, all the crops. They could theoretically wait out an invading army for years. You want to stay outside my house and throw stones? Go for it. I'll go on with life as usual. And in a few years, you'll get tired and go home. And that could very easily have been it. Cyrus was there for quite a while and could not take Babylon. Josephus makes the comment, and I've got that down in here too. Here's what Herodotus says about it. But basically, Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews 11 talks about how Cyrus is trying to figure out this problem. There is a group of Jews that come to Cyrus and say that we follow God, the one true God, and he put the Babylonians in power. And now, according to our prophecies, he's going to allow the Persians to conquer Babylon. Now, here's our prophet. This is 300 years old, but he actually mentions your name. And in this prophecy, apparently, you're having a problem trying to take Babylon. It's just complicated. And so in the prophecy, the angel wants to, and he said this to the prophet Isaiah 300 years ago, but this is to you. This is how you take the city. And they present it to him. Well, Cyrus is so overwhelmed with this, it's like, you have a God that wrote 300 years ago, not only I'm the one that takes Babylon, but that I'm having a problem, which I am, and how to fix it. Let me see this text. So he looks at the text, and it reads basically what we just read there out of Isaiah 44. So he begins to understand, okay, there's no way I can fly over. There's no way I can go through. There's no way I could go under. There's gates on everything. We're done. Except according to this, the angel goes before me and opens the brass gates. Everything in Babylon is like decked out with gold and silver and stones and stuff like that. The only brass gates are the ones that are under the city where the water comes in. So in other words, if he was to divert the water, he could send in troops. Now there'd be brass gates there, so it'd be the same thing. There's no use of even trying. But this prophecy has said there's a guy named Cyrus. He comes against Babylon. It's God's will for him to do this, to free the Jews, to take the property, conquer, and to build the temple. And he's going to be having a problem when this happens. And this is how you fix it. Well, I mean, what do you do with that, right? So Cyrus builds an aqueduct so that at the right time he can open a channel and divert the water, and the water level would drop. So that's Herodotus here. Let me see if I can get this a little clearer. There we go. Herodotus, in his history of the Greeks, 191, says that when Cyrus did this, he built this thing, opened the dam, and when he did, the water level dropped to the middle of a man's thigh. So this was a pretty large river. You can think of like the Mississippi River, but for just a short while, it drops all the way down to a man's thigh. So a small amount of troops could just walk in there. They did, and of course, for some reason, the brass gates were unlocked. So they go in, they sneak up, and go to the main gate, take over the few guards that are there, open the main gate, and let the troops in, and that's how Babylon was taken by Cyrus. So it's an interesting prophecy. And so this is going on the outside. And so you could understand if Daniel knew the prophecies of Isaiah, that Babylon would be there. And then another prophecy, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar, being king of Babylon, and there would be 3 generations. So if you're Daniel, before the Holy Spirit anoints you or anything, you believe you're a son of the prophets, you believe the prophecies. So 3 generations later, that's the guy currently ruling, ticks off the Persians, and they come at the door. The Persians are actually outside trying to break in. And humanly, they're not going to make it. So everything's fine. But the prophecy says that they do. And they're led by a guy named Cyrus. And these guys outside the door are actually led by a guy named Cyrus. So you're trying, it's not hard. So you can understand when Belshazzar has this handwriting on the wall, Daniel walks in there. This is in chapter 4, but he walks in there and basically says, okay, let me tell you what's going on. Yeah, I don't even need to look at it. I know what it means. Here's the deal. Because you're the 4th generation, and the 70 years is up tonight, and all of a sudden you have this miraculous handwriting on the wall. I better know what's going on, because he studies the prophecies. And you and I are not prophets, but if we study the prophecies, we can figure things out like that. Again, some of the things we still have to guess on, but we can understand a lot. So let me flip this over. He sees this vision in chapter 2. This is what we're looking at. Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. And we talked about, actually, let me flip over to this. We talked about in the Testament of Noah, he has this dream of these metal empires, right? So Daniel knows that we're in Babylon because we've been bad. The prophet Jeremiah says we'll be there for exactly 70 years from Nebuchadnezzar, or the guy that takes it 3 generations. And it's all cut and dry, usually to the day. And anciently, Noah had a dream of these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 empires that are going to try, and they're mountains of metal. And we've been talking about that the last few weeks. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the dream is there's a forest of trees. Each tree represents a Gentile nation. There's just tons of them. It's a forest. The earth is populated with nations. But there's this special nation down here, which is the nation of Israel. It's an olive tree. And everything's fine. Some of the trees have skirmishes with each other and stuff like that. But the main problem is that these mountains of iron come to create an empire, to take over country by country by country by country, to create an empire. And he gives this, and then he says, this is the one you have to worry about right now. And then he gives him a second part of the dream about Nimrod and those things that are happening. Well, we have this kind of a setup too. So Daniel would have known about these, of course. So now all of a sudden we get back to the place where we have Nebuchadnezzar. And he brings Daniel in, and he has this dream. And the dream is this head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet and toes of clay. Now, with that in mind, knowing the metal empires of Noah, gold, silver, copper, iron, he would have been very aware of who these two empires were. And now they are under the direction of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So they are in the third one, which is gold. So his, whatever it means, it's a gold kingdom. It's the label for this king that's over them now. So with that in mind, Nebuchadnezzar calls him. You don't tell this stuff to non-believers, right? So Nebuchadnezzar calls him. Nebuchadnezzar does not have a clue. He's an egotistical maniac that thinks he's God incarnate, and he's cool and can do anything he wants. And then, the things in Daniel happen to him. So he comes in and he says, I had this dream. It's really weird. There was this big statue. I was going to cause everybody to worship it. It has a head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of copper or brass, legs of iron, toes of feet of clay. Do you have any idea what that might mean? Oh, I think I have a clue. These are empires, that have to deal with Israel. And obviously you're the third one, because we're under you now. So you are the head of gold. After you will come another empire, somewhat inferior, obviously gold and silver. And then after them, another empire. And then after them, another empire. But for right now, you need to know that God has put you in control, and you need to be humble, lest he do something, because there's one true God. He begins to witness to him at this point. Now, later on, Daniel goes and asks God in a dream. We get into chapter 7. Can I have more information about the silver and because these are, obviously this part is getting ready to go over. Isaiah would predict the Persians. So somehow this must be Persia. And it's Medo-Persia. Maybe that's why there's two arms, Medes and Persians. He's thinking like this. And in my opinion, he's thinking like this. So, and then God does give them a lot of extra information. We get the same thing with Ezra. Ezra has the same picture, and he gets a lot of information about the legs of iron, which is what we've been kind of talking about. And this is most important to us, because when the legs of iron are over, we have the 10 toes that immediately develop. And in their days, the Messiah sets up his messianic kingdom. So this is toward the end. This is right toward the year 6000. And we're fastly approaching that now. So we're interested in all these prophecies, but to see this repetitive stuff is really cool. So we know that in 607, Babylon conquered Israel, and Israel went into slavery. 70 years later, 537, the Persian Empire takes over the Babylonian Empire. And we have that in Daniel 4 and other places. That very night, Belshazzar was slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom. And it may take a while to establish things, but basically there is a point that you can look at and say, at this point, that's when things happen. So then in 323, the Persian Empire falls to Alexander the Great. His kingdom breaks up into 4 pieces, and those details are given by Daniel elsewhere. But basically, Israel has problems with 2 of the 4 facets of the Greek Empire, until Rome finally comes in and takes over, and the era of the Greek Empire is over. And that's 64 BC, when Pompey marches into Jerusalem and says, this is now Roman territory. Anybody that doesn't like it gets shot. That's just it. And whether the Jews like it or not, it's like if you're Egypt or you're Syria or whomever, you mess with this territory, it's our territory now. You're messing with Rome, and you're basically declaring war on Rome. This is ours now. So as far as Israel's concerned, 64 BC is when that happens. Now, all this stuff is interesting because a lot of people and some cults still try to figure out, what do these mean? What are they? That kind of stuff. But in Daniel 2:38 is when Daniel actually says to Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. And in Daniel 5:31, he actually talks about how it's the Persians that come in and take over. Of course, we're already told that by Isaiah, in Isaiah 40 or 44. And then in Daniel 8, we're told that the Persian Empire falls to the Grecian Empire. The kings of Greece come. And then in Daniel 11:30, it's talking about all the subgroups of this, and then the ships of Kittim actually come and take over. And Kittim is an old Hebrew word for Rome. And so these are all mentioned in here specifically. And then the Empire of Clay mentioned in here again. So let's look at this prophecy just so we can get it in our minds. And this is in Daniel chapter 2. And you can read the first part of it, the first 30 verses, about how it fits, how he had the dream, the call of the wise men, the Magi, and Daniel, and this kind of stuff. But we get to this part here, and then Daniel gives him the dream and interprets it. And he says, you, O king, Nebuchadnezzar, saw and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. It doesn't mean it was bad, carved out bad and looked weird or anything. It just means terrible as an awesome. Very Norah is what the text actually says. So it's this incredible, magnificent, awe-inspiring image. You're like, oh, wow, look at this. So he sees this. The image's head was of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you saw until there was a stone cut without hands. And this is like we think of a stone as a large rock. It could be a rock or some sort of crystal, like a gemstone is a lot of times how we're looking at these. And this is interesting because Israel is the olive plant, which is a living thing. The other Gentile nations are cedar trees, or just trees in general, which are living things. These empires are kind of artificial. They're mountains of metal, okay? And some of them, like the lead, it actually calls it lead stones, which would be galena stones, where the crystals that we get them. Most of these come from some sort of crystalline type thing. And crystals that we're mainly familiar with would be like diamonds and rubies, and you put them in rings, those kind of crystals. And this is a stone cut without hands. It's not man-made, but it could be talking about a large stone, like a rock that destroys it, but most likely a crystal. So it's a crystalline metal type. It's an empire. In other words, it's the same concept. So this stone cut without hands, not man-made, came and smote the feet at the image, the part that was iron and clay, broke it into pieces. So then there was iron and clay and brass and silver and gold broken in pieces together, became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away. There was no place found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, okay, and then one of those metal type mountains, but it filled the whole earth. So it's God's kingdom or God's empire. And incidentally, people look at this and say, well, how is it that we've got iron, silver, gold, and brass, which are metals, and then we got clay, which is dirt? Why is that not metal or crystal? We don't realize it, but we're talking about how things form. There's galena crystals that lead comes from. Iron comes from iron ore, which is usually crystalline. Clay, you don't see it much, and when it's hardened, it's hard. When it's soft metal, it's actually called in some of the text. But clay is actually, I think it's aluminum sulfate, if I'm not mistaken. It's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's kind of like dirt or mud. It's got a bunch of stuff in it, but the main aspect is this soft metal. So really interesting. The concept gets lost slightly in English, but it's metal kingdoms, metal or crystalline kingdoms in whatever form they're forming. And then to know that God's kingdom is actually a stone that's cut, but not with human hands. So it's not like a rock or anything, or a round circle or an orb, but it's a stone that was cut. So in other words, gemstone again. So this is the dream, just short and sweet and simple. This is the dream, and I'll tell you what it means, he says to the king. You, king, are a king of kings, and again, empires. He's not just the king of one little country, he's a king of a bunch of stuff. You're a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom of power, strength, and glory. So wheresoever the children of men dwell, and the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven, he's given to your hand and made you a ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Now, later on in a chapter, he'll have a dream about a tree, and that still makes perfect sense. He's the Babylonian king. He's running an empire, but his actual kingdom, his actual tree, is Babylon. But Babylon gets cut down and in some sense destroyed. But the ring of brass and iron make you believe some facet of Babylon comes back. So that's just a clue to another prophecy. Excuse me. So anyway, you are this head of gold. After you will arise another kingdom inferior to you. And a lot of people get confused on this and think that, well, maybe we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar and his son and his grandson. In a sense, they're inferior. We're talking about kingdoms and empires. And of course, Daniel makes that clear later on in the book. So, and then a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over the whole earth. And people look at this and say, well, it was the known world at the time, but they didn't really conquer every part of the entire globe. The word earth here is eretz, and it can mean the entire planet. It can mean the dirt in your backyard. If I hold a handful of dirt up right here, this is earth or eretz. My backyard is my own personal eretz. Where I live in my city is that way. So it can mean multiple things. And I would probably translate this over the land of Israel. So specifically, and that's what we're always focusing in on these prophecies. They have something to do with Israel. Israel is God's key concept timepiece. So if Israel ceased to exist in 135 and then came back in 1948, you could have 29,000 empires during that time, but as far as prophecy would be concerned, who cares? Unless it had something to do to set up Israel coming back or something like that. But what happens in China or Argentina, United States, unless it has something to do with helping or hurting Israel in some way, then it's kind of irrelevant. It's just all those trees, whatever they're doing. So there's this kingdom inferior, which is silver, kingdom of brass, and then the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, insomuch that iron would break in pieces and subdue all these other things. If you had a sword made out of gold, I could bend it with my hand if it was solid gold. Gold's very soft. Now, copper would cut me. I don't think I could break copper very easy. I could with an iron sword. Silver, but iron is, think of a steel or stainless steel sword. You know, that's the kind of stuff that's strong. It doesn't break. I can't break that with my hands. It's a very, very serious thing. So this empire is that strong, and it can break in pieces any other kind of sword made out of brass or gold or silver or tin or whatever. And it says, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. There shall be in it the strength of the iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were also part of iron and part of clay, the kingdom will be partly strong and partly broken. And these are things that we look at, and I can't guarantee my understanding's correct yet anyway. I'm getting clues from the scrolls. But first off, there's a couple different ways of looking at this. Let me tell you one that I think is totally wrong that just helps us focus better. Some people have said, well, partially iron and partially clay. Well, if it's aluminum clay and it has no iron in it, it's that normal colored clay. If it has a lot of iron ore in the clay, it becomes that red clay. So maybe we're just talking about red clay. So it's one thing, not iron and clay, but just red clay. Well, if you look careful at this, that can't be what we're talking about, because it's partly of iron and partly of clay. And especially, let me stop for a second and bring back that other picture. And this is what Daniel's starting with his time period and going forward. He doesn't matter the previous stuff. So we have to go back to Noah. So if you have a metal lead stone, galena empire, and a soft metal clay, which is aluminum, then you have gold, silver, copper, and iron, lead, and clay. And this clay will be this actual soft metal clay mixed with iron. So we're not talking about a red clay mixture, but we're talking about these two pieces put together is what this empire ends up being. So if you identify this empire, Rome, and this empire, you probably have a pretty good understanding of what this empire is or how it starts. So again, with that in mind, partially of clay, partially of iron, not 100% red clay. So just saying that because not too many people mention that, but at first when you hear that, it's like, oh, that's a thought, but that's not what we're meaning. Two separate pieces, two separate metals, because the metal kingdoms or metal empires rather is what we're talking about. So let me go back to here. Okay. So this feet, and notice another thing here, the toes of the feet were partially of iron and partially of clay. But up here it says the feet and the toes were partially of iron and partially of clay. So it's not like, and this is another thing too. Let me flip back to the picture so I can tell you what I'm thinking. Metal empire. Okay. So it's not like here's the legs all metal down to here, and then the feet are also metal, and the only partial metal clay thing are these 10 little toes. So that's not what we're saying. The feet and the toes are this conglomeration of iron and metal, these two empires put together. And think of it like here, this is all silver, but it was the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire. This was one empire, Rome, but very quickly it splits into two empires, East and West Rome. So we've got Roman, Latin, and Byzantium. And then, of course, other things happen to it. It splits, and it's where we get the three-headed eagle prophecy. Excuse me. We're not told that the statue is deformed. So if it looks like a human being and it's not deformed, you have East and West Rome. You have 5 toes from Western Rome and 5 toes from Eastern Rome. So 5 kingdoms or states, countries, 5 countries from the Middle East, 5 countries from probably Europe or some conglomeration like that, 2 separate strands. And we can't identify them any further, but that's another clue. The church fathers even talk about this too. But so this is what we're talking about. So for our purposes, East and West Rome, it's the Iron Kingdom, and the feet and the toes are partially iron and partially clay. So it says, let me go back here. Whereas you saw the iron mixed with clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to the other, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Now, this could have one of two meanings, or probably both of the two meanings. Number one, people look at this and say, this really, in light of Genesis 6, this sounds really ominous. They, whoever they are, mingle themselves with the seed of men. It sounds like they are fallen angels, and we're talking about Nephilim genetic corruption again. That's a possibility because as far as the text goes, it's a possibility. But there's a simpler explanation than this. And that is that a king who rules with a rod of iron, for instance, will say, I want this done. And it's done. In the Roman Senate, there's laws. A Caesar can only do certain things. Much like in the United States, we have a president. The president has a lot of power, but there are certain things that he is forbidden to do. And so he tries to overstep his power. You may have problems for a short time, but then Congress basically, or the Supreme Court, says he can't do that. So that's just all there is to it. He might order a group of people to say they have to do or cannot do a certain thing. He doesn't make laws. As far as the United States people goes, he can't say squat on anything like that. Anyway, so that's up to the Congress, is what I'm saying, or the legislative branch. So same kind of stuff. So if you have even 10 kings, the kings, being kings and obstinate kind of, may not agree and may not get along. But if you have a kingdom, an empire, a country that has a king, but the king's power is divided because it's given to the people. In other words, it's a democratic type of kingdom, or at least in name. Maybe it's more of a strongman dictatorship or something, but there's still limits. A king can say, I executed the guy because I executed the guy. What's it to you? You want executed? And there's nothing you can do about it. He's king. Okay. But these other guys do the same thing, but they have to maintain a front. I don't understand. I don't know what you're talking about. And then they have someone executed. So there's a limit to the power. So it looks like, and in either case, we're talking about they mingle themselves with the seed of man. There's definitely enough people to say one thing and enough people to say another thing that they don't get along very well. Now, later on, we're told that these 10 kings come together to form an empire, and it doesn't quite work because it's just not there yet. You can think of the European common market. For a long time, they basically came together and pretty much worked well, but then they kind of started falling apart too. They never really could do much because there's too much voting, that kind of thing. Now, if the Antichrist is to step in, he's the 11th out of the 10 nations and say, this is what we're doing. And we have 3 of those nations say, no, we're not. The Antichrist wipes them out and says, anybody else have any questions? No, sir. Now they have one voice, one mind, one heart, which is the beast. And that's what's going to happen. So in the beginning, they're too democratic and they can't get anywhere. And that makes sense because when the Antichrist comes along, he has to defeat 3 of the 10. They still might have something to do with the Nephilim stuff. So we're not exactly sure, but that's one part anywhere. So they don't cleave one to the other. They're not uniform because there's too much division. Even as iron and clay won't mix together. So if you took clay and put it in fired it up and finished it, glazed it the whole 9 yards, it would be pretty hard. If you could take a hammer and destroy it and everything, but I mean, you could hit it and it lightly, and it would not break. It would be hard. It wouldn't bend or anything. But if in there you had several little nuggets of uh, any kind of hard metal, iron, little iron pieces in there, then the clay is not going to have a consistency. So if you were to take it and tap it, there's a good chance that the iron pieces would fall out and the clay would be brittle or break because there's not that much clay right there. So it's the same kind of thing here. They don't hold together well. In the days of these kings, these 10 kingdoms, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. The kingdom will not be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The kingdom of God will destroy it under the leadership of the Messiah. As some of the people that look at this and say this is all past, the preterists will say this is Antiochus Epiphanes, and we see it in Daniel when he takes over. Problem is, in Daniel 11, it doesn't stop with the Syrians and Antiochus Epiphanes. It goes up to the ships of Kittim coming. And the ships of Kittim come, take over, and actually burn the temple. That gets us to 70 AD. So if we're in 70 AD, we're not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes about 200 years before. So sometime in the future, from 70 AD forward, things happen. So this all has to be yet future, because then Israel ceases to exist in 135, comes back in 1948. So this all happens sometime after 1948 AD. So these 10 nations come up. Okay, and then verse 45, it says, "For as much as you saw the stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, it break the pieces of iron, brass, clay, silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass thereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure." And then Daniel gets promoted. So, but this is that whole thing again. So there's a lot there that are a few things here we're not absolutely sure, but now the church fathers make a little more sense in some of the things that they talk about. So just to recap here, you've got the Middle Empires of Daniel, Babylonian Empire, Persian, Grecian, and Roman. The Roman one divides in 395 into East and West and goes down to, I've got highlighted in here, 1917. But as we talked about it last time, we have this empire here. Rome is pagan, has been pagan in an empire for a long time. And then in 64 BC, it conquers Israel. So that's where we would get interested in. So from 64 AD forward, 64 BC going forward, Israel is owned, so to speak, by Rome. Well, Rome becomes Christian in 380, and in 135, Israel ceases to exist. So we're done. But how the empire morphs until Israel comes back is what the Ezra Apocalypse basically talks to us about. So in 395, the empire splits into East and West Rome, and that would be the two legs of Daniel's understanding. So the Western Rome falls in 476, and then Roman Catholicism basically rules in Rome. It's the only governing power really in Rome from 476 to 800. Okay. And then at that point, they are able to successfully rebuild a type of empire, half of it. The old Western Roman Empire is kind of reborn. And you might think it's kind of a fake when it doesn't count, but it's from the whatever authority is in Rome, Italy, okay, has created or revived an empire. So it pretty much is a Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Empire is from 800 to 1806. So for 1,000 years, you have that Roman Empire again. During this time, back in 395, the Caesars actually went over to Byzantium and started the Byzantine Empire. So the Caesar line goes all the way down through the start of Islam, the Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox split of 1056. And then in 1453, it falls, the empire falls to the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire ruled it until World War I, which was 1917. So during this time, you have the Holy Roman Empire ending in 1806. And then a few years later, the Second Reich began. So that's Germany trying to reestablish the Roman Empire, as Second Reich. And that continues until 1917. Again, World War I changed everything. World War I, if I can say it this way, is the United States and Western powers, democracy, or I shouldn't even say democracy, republic, stepping in and stopping or annihilating or destroying the Roman Empire. So at this point, and the main reason for doing this is because Germany is one thing, the Ottoman Empire is pretty extensive, but it's another thing. If these two come back together, you can't allow it. It's like two larger, it's like China and Russia and the United States all coming together to form some evil empire. What could anybody do with something like that? So you've got to break them up or do something. So that's what happens here. But what happens is right before the fall, the Caesar line actually goes into Russia. So Tsarist Russia in the 1500s. Well, they were in World War II also, and the Tsarist Empire ends in 1917. So World War II actually ends a lot of stuff. But communist Russia arises, which has got nothing to do with anything, just a different thing for that. But that's from 1917 to 1991. And then 1991 to the president, it's a Russian Federation, which currently is being run by Putin, who has changed the laws to where he gets to continue to be president until his death. It's not like a kingship where his son instantly becomes the next ruler or anything like that. So it's a little different, but it's still very much more king-like. So this ends, but during this time, Russia's kind of out of commission in the sense of the prophecies. But then in 1938, Adolf Hitler rises to power in Germany and actually tries to reconstitute the Roman Empire again. But instead of just recreating the Western version, he tries to talk with the Arabs and try to reconstitute the what used to be the Ottoman Empire. So if we can get the Ottoman Empire and this together, that pretty much would be the empire. And that's something that can't be allowed. So World War II again happens to, for the second time, destroy the attempted revival of the Roman Empire. And then a few years later, Israel forms. And that's the era that we're in now, is the last period with Israel here. So this is interesting. When we get to the Gog and Magog War, you have Magog, which is Russia, and that's identified in the book of Jasher. So we know we're talking about that people. And then Gomer with all of his bands. We know Gomer's son was Ashkenazic Jews or German Jews. So you can think about it that way. So if Germany, with all of its old empire groups coming together with Russia, with all of its empire, Caesar, Tsar type stuff together, and they actually are able to come together, that would reconstitute the Roman Empire. The prophecy says that the Western nations, the ships of Tarshish, or the cubs rather of Tarshish, which are United States and the Western powers, for some reason we don't respond this time, which is the reason why the empire can reconstitute. But this is why God steps in and destroys it on the mountains of Israel. Again, which is talked about in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gad chapter 1 and 2, the Ezra Apocalypse, I think 15 and 16. So all these things, we'll look at them piece by piece. But tonight I just wanted to go over this and look at this, and most of us are very familiar with the metal images or empires of Daniel. We look at that, we know exactly what we're talking about. The only confusion is that we sometimes tend to think that the Roman Empire fell in 476 or 1453, or even some of us will say the western leg fell in 476. This one fell in 1453. So this is a very lopsided, statue. And it's two divisions, but the empire goes at the same time. So this is interesting. So this is really not 1917. It's not really 1945. It hasn't really happened yet, but it's in the last stages. It's an empire that dies kind of, but comes back or is revived. Anyway, so there's a lot of other things to it, but this is where we get the statue concept, Daniel chapter 2, and then in the the Testament of Noah from the scrolls, we get the empires, the Middle Empires. So we'll come back together and do those really well. This is our basic empire outline. So again, to remind you, Revelation talks about 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other's not yet come, talking about those empires. The one that is, we know is Rome. He identifies it as Rome, the city that now rules. And so we've got Noah's empires, Daniel's empires, all of metal that match, and then the animals, and the animals that match. And so we're going to go through and study this in depth in the future. But tonight we just wanted to focus on Daniel to see what we got, how Daniel 2 is used, what the symbolism is. And it's really neat. For the longest time, we always connected these together, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, but we never were able to put it with the Dead Sea Scrolls before. So we're going to stop there for tonight, but we'll try to keep going on this stuff. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time. God bless.